Buon pomeriggio. Stiamo per iniziare una serie di incontri sul concetto di interdipendenza nel mondo contemporaneo. Questo progetto prevedeva inizialmente l'organizzazione di un convegno internazionale all'Orientale di Napoli presso il Dipartimento di Studi su Asia, Africa e Mediterraneo, ma considerando la grave situazione della pandemia mondiale abbiamo dovuto trasformarlo in una serie di incontri webinar che iniziano oggi. È un'iniziativa che nasce all'interno di un progetto più ampio di sensibilizzazione alla cittadinanza globale, cofinanziato dall'Agenzia Italiana della Cooperazione allo Sviluppo e promosso dall'Associazione Non Governativa Asia, in collaborazione tra gli altri anche con il Centro di Studi sul Buddismo dell'Orientale di Napoli. Sono stati organizzati una serie di attività per promuovere l'interazione tra persone di culture diverse e abbattere i muri dei pregiudizi e dell'odio per lo straniero che purtroppo sempre di più verifichiamo nella nostra società contemporanea. Sono stati scelti alcuni temi che rappresentano alcuni valori dei popoli stranieri che vivono nei paesi dove opera l'organizzazione non governativa Asia, che sono principalmente i paesi di cultura buddista tibetana. L'IASI ha progetti per la preservazione della lingua, della cultura, del grande patrimonio di arte che questi paesi preservano e il grande patrimonio letterario, filosofico, spirituale proprio di questa grande cultura, che è la cultura tibetana. A Roma e a Milano si sono concentrati su altri valori come l'empatia e la non violenza, ma noi vogliamo affrontare il concetto di interdipendenza, che è un concetto filosofico importante su cui possiamo dire si fonda l'ontologia buddista e che è in antitesi con l'idea che gli esseri esistano in quanto monadi, in quanto mondi chiusi che non dipendono l'uno dall'altro. Nel buddismo quest'idea è considerata un errore filosofico, mentre si postula l'interdipendenza di tutti i fenomeni e la si spiega da un punto di vista teorico. Questi incontri sono pensati come dei dialoghi tra esponenti della cultura buddista tibetana e personalità scientifiche, intellettuali, insegnanti, imprenditori della nostra società occidentale contemporanea. Li abbiamo messi in dialogo proprio per cercare di capire se questo antico mondo tibetano ha qualcosa da dire oggi a noi occidentali, qualcosa di utile per vivere meglio nelle nostre società, per vivere meglio il nostro essere nel mondo. Quindi oggi avremo come ospiti un grande esponente della filosofia tibetana, ve lo presenterò subito, e uno scienziato, un fisico quantistico, perché ci sono degli elementi tra l'ontologia buddista e la fisica quantistica che sembrano di straordinaria consonanza. Bene, adesso passiamo subito ai saluti di coloro che hanno reso possibile questa manifestazione, la dottoressa Grazia Sgarra dell'Agenzia Italiana per la Cooperazione allo Sviluppo, il professore Andrea Manzo, direttore del Dipartimento di Asia, Africa e Mediterranea dell'Orientale di Napoli, e Andrea Dell'Angelo, direttore di Asia. A tutti loro il nostro più sentito ringraziamento.
Buon pomeriggio a tutti, vi ringrazio di avermi invitato all'apertura di una serie di incontri relativi al progetto Distinti ma non distanti. Vi saranno infatti, seguiranno una serie di giornate dedicate al progetto, si confronteranno diversi punti di vista, tutti ospitati dall'Università Orientale di Napoli. Il cuore del progetto Distinti ma non distanti, promosso dalla OSCE Asia e finanziato dall'Agenzia Italiana per la Cooperazione allo Sviluppo nell'ambito del bando per l'educazione alla cittadinanza globale del 2018, è la diversità quale fonte di ricchezza, quale valore positivo e non più vista come problema. Si può arrivare a fare proprio questo valore, a internalizzare questo valore partendo da prospettive e coordinate differenti. La OSCE Asia ha scelto di partire dai principi, dai valori della cultura buddista: l'empatia, la interdipendenza e la non violenza, educando la cittadinanza verso l'uguaglianza e verso la interazione tra culture diverse in 3 città come Roma, Milano e Napoli molto complesse. E lo hanno fatto tramite diversi eventi, formazioni, conferenze, contest, coinvolgendo studenti e docenti. Mi piace ricordare soprattutto 3 di questi eventi. Il primo: oggi a scuola ci vai tu, i bambini insegnano l'empatia, e l'evento Scopriamo l'empatia, performance artistiche e laboratori. Attraverso l'empatia reciproca, la percezione empatica dell'altro, il progetto della OSCE Asia ha dato e ha fornito un kit di emozioni in grado di trasformare la conflittualità in dialogo. E inoltre il progetto ha sperimentato la ricchezza della diversità anche attraverso il cibo, attraverso lo show cooking. Il cibo non solo quale fonte di ricchezza nella diversità, ma anche come veicolo di inclusione e di condivisione. E vorrei ricordare in ultima analisi anche l'iniziativa Human Library, dove attraverso i libri umani si è avuto modo di avviare un dialogo e la comprensione più profonda tra persone diverse per età, per stili di vita, per background culturale. Quindi si parte dall'empatia, si parte dai libri umani e si parte dal cibo per giungere al rispetto dei diritti e all'abbattimento delle barriere culturali generatrici di discriminazione ed esclusione sociale. Essere distinti è un bene, è una ricchezza. Questo progetto ci insegna però a non aver paura della diversità. L'evento di oggi chiama tutti noi a fare nostro questo valore della diversità quale ricchezza. E in questo periodo storico così particolare, dove c'è imposta una distanza fisica, abbattiamo la distanza empatica, facciamoci trasportare dalla curiosità e dall'entusiasmo di conoscere persone culturalmente diverse da noi, per rimanere distinti ma non distanti. Buon lavoro a tutti e grazie.
Dear participants to the international meeting, The Buddhist View of the Interdependence in the Contemporary World, East Dialogues with the West. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, as the director of the Department of Asian, African and Mediterranean Studies of the University of Naples L'Orientale, I am very happy to welcome you in our department. Unfortunately, due to the present situation, this is only a virtual occasion. The meeting we are opening today is taking place in the framework of a project elaborated by the Associazione per la Solidarietà Internazionale in Asia, the Centro di Studi sul Buddismo of the Università L'Orientale, and other partners. The project was approved and granted by the Italian Agency for the International Cooperation, Agenzia Italiana per la Cooperazione e lo Sviluppo. I will add that this project is a further element in the framework of a very strong relation between the agency and our department, as we are also collaborating in the field of higher education with some scholarship for foreign students from countries of Asia and Africa, which are provided to our PhD program by the agency in the past year. The academic collaboration with Addis Ababa University in the field of archaeology, also granted by the agency. The joint actions for the management and protection of the cultural heritage of Afghanistan, and many other collaborative programs. As you know, today's meeting is a part of a much more ambitious project. This project includes actions to be conducted not only in Naples, but also in Rome, in Milan, in order to promote the Buddhist principles of empathy, interdependency, and non-violence. The aim of the project is the promotion of these principles to universal values. Indeed, these are values, I will say basic values, for realizing a society based on inclusion and tolerance. I was really impressed when I read the complete program whose this meeting is a part. The program not only includes public events and happenings, among them a concert, but also actions and activities conducted in and with the schools. I think this is a very relevant aspect of the project. It offers to our department, a long-established institution for the study of the cultures of Asia and Africa, an important opportunity of having an impact on society, which is a relevant mission of a modern university, and as it is moreover requested by the Ministry of University in the framework of what is called third mission of the university, beside research and teaching. In doing so, I think that networks, also including other public and private actors and stakeholders, are crucial. And the network behind the project we are dealing with today is a very good example of this. This remark gives me the opportunity of thanking our partners in the program, not only Asia, which is coordinating the program, but also the Museo dei Bambini Onlus, Rome, the Programma Integra, Rome, and the Fondazione Empatia, Milan. In the program, an important task of our Center of Studies on the Buddhism is the organization of today's meeting. The idea behind is to promote scientific debate and to use the results of this debate to conduct the actions in the schools and in the society. It is a very ambitious goal, but I am very confident that the hoped result will be achieved, because I know the skills and the competence of my colleagues in the Center of Studies on the Buddhism. The center is indeed one of the excellencies of my department, and I should thank all the colleagues involved in this activity and the President Giacomello Rufino for this. I'm also confident that the goal will be achieved looking at the program of the 5 meetings which are scheduled and at the quality of the scholars the center was able to involve in today's panel and in the next ones, thanks to its broad network of solid academic relations. So, I thank you very much for your attention. Again, welcome to our guest, and I wish you a fruitful meeting.
Buon pomeriggio e benvenuti al primo degli incontri di questo ciclo di conferenze sull'interdipendenza, The Buddhist View of Interdependence in the Contemporary World, East Dialogue with West, organizzato dal Centro Studi sul Buddismo dell'Università Orientale di Napoli. Questo convegno è una delle attività principali di un più vasto progetto di educazione alla cittadinanza globale, distinti ma non distanti, i valori custoditi dalla cultura buddista come mezzo per abbattere i confini interiori e per rendere la diversità una grande ricchezza. Realizzato da Asia in partenariato con Fondazione Empatia Milano, Programma Integra, Centro Studi sul Buddismo e Explora, il Museo dei Bambini di Roma. Questa iniziativa nasce dal fatto che il nostro paese, crocevia di migranti, meta per gli sbarchi e prima accoglienza per moltissime persone provenienti da paesi in stato di emergenza, vede la sua società civile sempre più attraversata da un conflitto che oscilla tra uno spiccabile senso di solidarietà e di incontro tra culture e una percezione spesso distorta dell'altro, causata molte volte da un'informazione sbagliata o di parte e dalla incapacità, il più delle volte, della politica di far fronte a questo fenomeno e alle conseguenze sociali ed economiche che sta provocando. Fenomeni d'odio, di intolleranza e discriminazione verso la comunità dei migranti sono diventate sempre più frequenti. Asia, con i suoi partner, ha avviato un ambizioso percorso di sensibilizzazione per promuovere la conoscenza di quei valori universali che mettano in risalto le differenze come arricchimento e non come minaccia, accorciando le distanze tra individui di diverse culture e tradizioni. Il bisogno di sensibilizzare la società civile sul tema della cittadinanza globale è diventato sempre più necessario. Il progetto, finanziato dall'Agenzia Italiana per la Cooperazione allo Sviluppo, è iniziato nel maggio del 2019 e terminerà a giugno 2021 con un concerto dal vivo del musicista Paolo Fresu e dal titolo Abbattiamo i muri. In questi mesi, nonostante le grandi difficoltà causate dalla pandemia, sono state molte le iniziative organizzate da Asia e dai suoi partner in 3 città italiane: Roma, Milano e Napoli. Queste città rappresentano contesti urbani molto complessi, dove le diseguaglianze socio-economiche sono molto forti e dove episodi di intolleranza e di razzismo sono spesso frequenti. Studenti e insegnanti della scuola primaria sono stati coinvolti in percorsi di formazione e laboratori sull'empatia, la non violenza e l'interdipendenza per aiutare i bambini a sviluppare una loro consapevolezza emotiva e sociale e per creare una società del futuro più armonica e meno violenta. L'introduzione dell'insegnamento dello yoga tibetano Kumar Kumari in alcune scuole di Napoli e di Roma ha dato dei risultati inaspettati, permettendo ai bambini di entrare in contatto con se stessi, di osservarsi in una dimensione libera dai continui stimoli e sollecitazioni e molte volte in contesti che sono troppo competitivi. Studenti delle scuole superiori e i loro insegnanti hanno partecipato ad attività di formazione e sensibilizzazione alla comunicazione non violenta in risposta al deterioramento continuo del linguaggio e della comunicazione a cui assistiamo giornalmente sui social e sui quali i giovani hanno un concreto potere di incidere. A Roma e Milano abbiamo organizzato incontri con migranti provenienti da diversi paesi per fargli raccontare dal vivo le loro storie di migrazioni, le cause che li hanno portati a lasciare le loro case, le loro famiglie, per sfuggire da guerre e da miseria. Questi incontri hanno aiutato le persone che hanno partecipato a entrare in contatto con il fenomeno delle migrazioni, fenomeno che il più delle volte è strumentalizzata a fini politici e ai quali le istituzioni non riescano a trovare delle soluzioni che sono adeguate e sostenibili. In questo sforzo di raggiungere un numero elevato di persone e di diffondere in maniera puntuale questi valori sono state tante altre le attività che noi abbiamo realizzato. Ricordo gli show cooking fatti da coppie di cuochi costituiti da uno straniero e da un italiano, il video sull'interdipendenza La mucca nel cielo, prodotto dalla Maied Entertainment di Napoli e diffuso poi nelle scuole e in festival di animazione cinematografica. Il progetto, come ho accennato, ha l'obiettivo di portare in maniera concreta all'interno della nostra società, sempre più dilaniata da questi fenomeni di discriminazione, di violenza e di razzismo, questi valori fondamentali della cultura buddista che sono la non violenza, l'empatia e l'interdipendenza. Il nostro scopo è anche il raggiungimento dell'obiettivo 10 dell'Agenda 2030 per lo sviluppo sostenibile, ridurre le diseguaglianze all'interno degli Stati e tra gli Stati stessi. A questo punto credo che venga spontaneo chiedersi: ma come mai un'organizzazione non governativa come Asia ha intrapreso questo percorso? Perché Asia è un'organizzazione fondata nel lontano 1988 da Chogyal Nankainorbu, uno dei più autorevoli esponenti della cultura e della spiritualità tibetana. Chogyal Nankainorbu venne in Italia dal Tibet nel 1960 su invito del professor Giuseppe Tucci, con il quale ha collaborato per molti anni all'Ismeo, per poi diventare professore di lingua e letteratura tibetana e mongola all'Orientale di Napoli. Cattedra che lasciò nel 1991 e la cui eredità è stata presa dalla professoressa Giacomello Rofino, alla quale va il nostro più sentito ringraziamento per il grande lavoro svolto nell'organizzare questo convegno. Asia opera ormai da più di 30 anni nel continente asiatico e in particolare in Cina, nelle regioni a minoranza tibetana, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Mongolia e Myanmar. E in tutti questi anni ha aiutato più di 1.400.000 persone. Oltre ad aver acquisito professionalità ed esperienza nella gestione di progetti di sviluppo e di emergenza, Asia e tutto il suo personale in Italia e nel mondo hanno assorbito i valori incontrati in molte di queste antiche culture. Valori come la consapevolezza, l'altruismo, l'apertura verso le culture diverse, il coinvolgimento delle comunità locali, il rispetto dell'ambiente e degli ecosistemi sono diventati parte integrante del nostro lavoro. L'obiettivo della nostra associazione non è soltanto la lotta alla povertà, ma quello di creare una cultura di pace e di tolleranza per creare una società migliore, rispettosa dell'individuo e dell'ambiente in cui vive. In conclusione, vorrei ringraziare tutti i relatori che, nonostante il difficile periodo, hanno aderito con entusiasmo alla conferenza. Il personale di Asia, in particolare Lorenza Sebastiani, coordinatrice di questo progetto, la professoressa Giacomello Orofino e tutto lo staff del Centro di Studi sul Buddismo, l'Orientale di Napoli, l'AICS in particolare Serena Spitover e Grazia Sgarra e la società Tecnomedit e Rita Cristallo che con grande professionalità ci hanno permesso di connetterci in così tante parti del mondo. A voi tutti, buon lavoro.
Now we start with the presentation. I have to present Venerable Geshe Dorji Damdul. I'm very honored that he joined us today, and he is one of the most interesting figure of Tibetan philosopher. He is presently director at the Tibet House at the New Delhi, the cultural center of His Holiness. He has been studying Buddhist philosophy for more than 30 years, and he finished his degrees with his Geshe Larampa degree, and then he joined the Jurme Tantric College, and then he studied also at Cambridge University. In fact, he's quite proficient in English, and he was appointed as the official translator of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and he has been acting as a translator, but also translator of text from Tibetan into English, as he has translated the Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna and the Bodhicharya Avatara by Shantideva. And he was then appointed as the director of the Tibet House, and he has been working as a chief editor for many books, and especially I mentioned Buddhist science and philosophy with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and at the moment he's also working on other texts like Emotional Awareness with Professor Paul Elkham with the His Holiness is also co-author His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and was assigned also with other scholars, so for other books like Ethics for the New Millennium and The Art of Happiness, and other several publications which are really very interesting and important. So please, Venerable Geshe-la, the share is with you. Thank you very much.
Welcome you all to this presentation. I'm extremely grateful to Professor Orofino for since last 2 years. She has been reaching out to me and to many other scholars, and in order to bring together the scholars from the different parts of the world. And the Center for Studies in Buddhism, University of Naples. This is a great honor for me. And the next slide. Okay, so what we're going to study here is basically interdependency in the Nalanda philosophy. So here, I picked up the concepts from Heart Sutra and quantum mechanics to some extent to see the comparison and then see where it goes. And both of these, say the Buddhist philosophy of interdependency on the one hand, and quantum mechanics on the other hand, we see that there are many parallels One of which for the lay audience is that they both are extremely profound. For example, Niels Bohr, one of the pioneers of quantum physics, what he said was that if quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. So this is what Niels Bohr said. In other words, the quantum mechanics, how things represent themselves. In other words, reality out there, this is something very different from how we see things. And likewise, the Buddha himself, the next slide, please. And the Buddha, this is what Niels Bohr said, and the Buddha put it likewise in a very profound sense, where the Buddha said, profound, peaceful, free of elaborations, clear light, non-composite, such a nectar-like reality. This reality out there, what we are seeing is not the reality. That reality, if you unfold this is what I found. Finding no one who can fathom this path or this reality. To see this reality is so difficult to see people who can actually get it. In silence, I'll return to the words, indicating that this reality is very profound. So we see that both the systems, the Buddhist philosophy of interdependency and the quantum mechanics, indicated that the reality out there is very different from what we are seeing. So now the question is, how can we get there, this question? The next slide. Why objectivity is emphasized in Buddhist philosophy and quantum physics? Why objectivity? In quantum physics, of course, not only quantum physics, in relativity theory, and also chemistry, biology, neuroscience, in all studies, modern education, there's a tremendous emphasis on the objectivity, meaning that what is the objective reality out there, which should not be influenced by our subjective thinking. So this is the basic, how everything's triggered to see the parallels between Buddhist philosophy of interdependency and the modern science of quantum physics. The next slide. Interestingly, one thing which can differ between modern science and Buddhist philosophy is the soteriological purpose. In Buddhist philosophy, so why do we inquire into the reality or the objective reality is to eventually to seek the maximum benefit. What is that benefit? So what it says here is very important. The two passages by Nagarjuna. I don't want to go into length. It simply said that everyone is seeking happiness. Everyone is seeking to get rid of the suffering. And this potential, say, you squeeze a handful of sand, no matter how much you squeeze a handful of sand, no oil will come out of that. Whereas if you squeeze a handful of sunflower seeds, of course, the oil will come out of that. Likewise, whether or not we can, each one of us, whether you're a boy, whether you're male or female, educated, uneducated, Westerner, Easterner, or Buddhists, non-Buddhists, Christians, non-Christians, it doesn't matter. Everyone, the Buddha said, that you have the ultimate source of happiness within you. So how to uncover that, how to unravel that is by removing the mental dirt, remove the mental dirt. So the true nature of the purity, like the gold, is there. At the moment, it doesn't glow because it is being enshrouded by the metal dirt. So how to unfold that, unravel that is by removing the metal dirt. What is that metal dirt constituted of? This is very important. So the Buddha identified that this metal dirt is none other than our own ignorance. What is ignorance? Ignorance is where we see things very differently from how things actually exist. In other words, we project our own reality as opposed to the reality out there. So the next slide. The next question is, how can we then unfold this reality, which is really out there, rather than the reality that our mind is imposing on the objectivity or the objective reality? So this passage, which is extremely important. One point when I was in England, in Cambridge, of course I've been meeting physicists all the time, just for information, for light, to make things lighter. When I was in school, when I was in the late teenage, I was so keen to become a physicist. Had it not been the case that I've been into the Buddhist philosophy, I would surely have been really engrossing myself into physics. So this physicist, he told me in Cambridge, we became good friends later on. He told me that, Dorji, in this world, only physics is education. And I said, why? Then he said that only physics allows you to have critical thinking, and all others are like the imitation of the earlier teachers. Okay, I was a little taken aback by this, what he said. And then I told him, okay, well, listen to what the Buddha has to say. Then I cited this verse, just as the goldsmith tests the purity of the gold by cutting, rubbing, and burning the gold, you should also examine my words and put them into practice, not simply because you respect me. Then the physicist, he remained silent for a few seconds, and he said, oh, the Buddha must have been a great physicist. Okay, the next slide. Okay, if this is approach, that we should really explore the reality objectively without being influenced by our own superimposition, then what is the ontological reality? What is really out there, this question? And how can we unravel this? So this takes us to what is known as the concept of the interdependency in Buddhist philosophy, which is at the core of all the practice and all the transformation, all the soteriological purposes. So to bring about a greater happiness in yourself, to bring about harmony in the world, to mitigate the domestic violence. All these things are heavily dependent on to what extent you understand the concept of the interdependency, which the Buddha identified as the ontological reality. Okay, the next. So this interdependency is so important, while many people who somehow come in contact with Buddhism, particularly the Buddhism from Nalanda tradition, they talk about emptiness all the time, emptiness. And many physicists also, and having had some access to Buddhist philosophy, they also talk about they try to compare emptiness Buddhism and the quantum vacuum and so forth from the quantum mechanics. So at the same time, many people tend to misrepresent what emptiness is. So what I said is the basic fabric of the Buddhist philosophy lies on the concept of interdependency or the concept of dependent origination. And this is what we interpret as the emptiness. And if you look at this, what I wrote there is emptiness, it doesn't mean nothingness. Oftentimes, even many professors, they tend to interpret emptiness to mean nothingness or just the nil, nihilism. That is totally naive, is totally the misrepresentation of the reality. Whereas emptiness connotes dependent origination. And the dependent origination connotes the middle way. This is a very important point, which I'd like to highlight before I go into the comparative studies between the emptiness in the study of the Buddhist philosophy and quantum mechanics. So here, emptiness means dependent origination. We need to know how these two mean the same. Emptiness equals dependent origination. So this should be understood by means of the 5 points. The first, the emptiness. And emptiness does not mean nothingness. Emptiness is a short form of emptiness of independent existence. This is number 2, emptiness of independent existence. Number 3, emptiness of independent existence means nothing exists independently. Number 3, nothing exists independently means, number 4, everything exists by dependence. Everything exists by dependence means everything is dependently originated, dependent origination. So with these 5 points, we come to deduce that emptiness does not mean nihilism, it means dependent origination. The next part, dependent origination means the middle way. How? Dependent origination has 2 sides. So 2 sides, dependence and origination. The first, dependent. When we say dependent means in our mind, it rejects independence. It rejects absolutism. So, but understanding of dependence, it helps us to reject the extreme of absolutism. Versus the other side, origination. Origination connotes something coming into existence, coming into origination. When it says something comes to the existence or origination, it rejects non-existence. So non-existence and nihilism, they mean the same. So the second part, origination, it rejects nihilism. Bringing the dependency and the origination together as dependent origination, it removes the two extremes, extreme of absolutism and extreme of nihilism. Rejecting the two extremes is following the middle way. So from this, we come to deduce that dependent origination is the middle way. So when we say A equals B equals C, by default, we are saying A equals C. So likewise, emptiness equals dependent origination equals middle way, therefore emptiness equals the middle way. So therefore, emptiness should not be understood as nihilism. If this is how somebody interprets it, the one is falling into the totally erroneous understanding of emptiness. The next slide. Okay, so what I said earlier, the earlier slide, which shows that emptiness equals dependent origination, and dependent origination equals emptiness. So this is precisely said by Nagarjuna, the 1st century AD great Buddhist scholar. So it says, whatever is dependent originated, that is posited to be empty. Empty doesn't mean nothingness, it means dependent origination. That being mentally designated, this is the middle way. That being mentally designated, this is the important point. This is what brings quantum mechanics and Buddhist philosophy closer. The next slide. The next slide. Okay. Now, this concept, emptiness, is to be seen in the light of dependent origination, or oftentimes people they interpret it as interdependency. So this interdependency or dependent origination, we see that it has 3 levels. The way and manner in which His Holiness the Dalai Lama teaches in public, how he presents it so beautifully on 3 levels. And these 3, they differ in subtlety. From the number 1 through to number 3, they progressively becoming subtler. The first one is dependent origination causation, which means that anything that we see as a result should necessarily come into being by dependence on its previous causes. This is pretty easy. At the same time, this is a very important concept. Second one is dependent origination of the whole and the parts. Whatever we see as a whole, like the whole universe, this universe is nothing but constituted of its parts, like the Milky Way galaxy and the other galaxies, and each of the galaxies, they are constituted of the solar system, the stars, the moon, the planets, and so forth. So how the whole comes into being by dependency, by dependence on the parts. And finally, this is a very important point, dependent origination of mere mental designation, how things come into being by the power of the subjective designation, by the power of the mental designation. The next slide, please. Okay, so now this brings us to the concept of this microcosm and a macrocosm. Macrocosm, talking about the whole universe, the Milky Way galaxy, the galaxies, and the solar system, and so forth. This is a macrocosm, and a microcosm like the elementary particles, particles like say electrons, protons, neutrons, bosons, and so forth. So this says about, we see that there are 2 worlds. One is the macro and one is the micro. In a very loose sense, what you can say is that this macro that we see is nothing but constituted of the micro world. And the point is, how does the world behave in the macro level, and how does the same world behave on the macro level? This is an extremely important conversation. The next slide, please. Okay, so this concept of the micro and the macro, If you look at the Heart Sutra by the Buddha, we see that what the Buddha taught is the form is empty and emptiness is form. And while it's just two simple lines, the meanings are heavily loaded there. There's a tremendous gravity there in terms of the meaning. The form is empty. What we see as the universe, what we see as the human body, what we see as the water, and so forth, these are represented by this word form. The form on the macro level, what do we see on the macro level? The form is, in the micro level, is just empty. Empty meaning empty of objective reality. And whereas what we see as, on the macro level, what we see as empty manifests in the form of the physical form on the macro level. So the micro and the macro, these two overlap each other, but they behave very differently. They are seen very differently. And then form is not other than emptiness. Emptiness is not other than the form. So these two lines explain that these two worlds, the macro world and the micro world, should not be seen as two distinct entities. Instead, these two must be seen as the same reality seen in two different forms, one in the macro form and one in the micro form. The next slide, please. Okay, this is interesting. This is the interesting part. The truth, the ontological reality. In other words, Buddhist systems, quantum mechanics, and Buddhist philosophy of dependent origination say that don't trust your perceptions. What you perceive as the world outside there, this is not the reality. So, in other words, the reality outside there, what is the objective reality there? The emptiness of the objectivity is the reality out there. There's nothing there from the object. And of course, the quantum mechanics, if you look at this, Professor Andrea Dell'Angelo. In fact, I'm very fortunate that I had the honor of meeting with him and then having had the opportunity to discuss. In fact, I was just nothing. And then Professor Andrea Dell'Angelo, he was so interested to see that a Buddhist monk is asking a question on quantum mechanics. So we had, I invited him to my room, and then we had tea together, and he was inviting questions. Okay, you seem to have the interesting questions, quantum mechanics, and then he was, so this double slit experiment, I was asking many questions related to that, keeping them aside. What we see is that from this, the double slit experiment, what we can see is that how the particles behave, how the electrons behave, how the photons behave. So there's, I'll say, how you design the experiment. One way, it behaves like a particle. And then when you design the experiment in another way with the double slit, then the electrons or the photons, they behave as the waves. The point is that this designing the experiment differently connotes the observer, where depending on the observer, that decides what the observed is, object. So independent of the observer, we cannot really decide what the object is like. So this is an extremely important revolution which was totally absent in the Newtonian physics. So in Buddhist philosophy, we look for the objective reality out there. What is the objective reality out there? When that is ours, then we come to realize that from the object, there's nothing there. It's all coming from the subject. So therefore, it takes us to understand the emptiness for objectivity is the objectivity of the reality. The next slide, please. Okay, so the subjectivity, when I say that emptiness of the objectivity, automatically it'll take you to understand the subjectivity, meaning that things, objectivity, emptiness, that objectively nothing's there from the object, that is the objectivity of the object, meaning that it's purely subjective. How your mind projects it, that is how the things exist. So this subjectivity has various levels of understanding. Some are very gross and some are extremely subtle. And for example, let's say the first one, emptiness observed, independent observer, how that's explained by the quantum physicists, that it entirely depends on the observer. So what kind of the observation or the experiment, how you design it, depending on that the observer, then the observed is seen. Independent of the observer, the observed doesn't make any sense. So then the second one, emptiness of externality. What we see is external there, like a mirror, and the image in the mirror. We see the image of the mirror as though like separate by distance, but in actuality, it's just nothing by the nature how the mirror is seen to have the mirror and the reflection inside to be separate by distance. This is purely illusion that is not really there as such, like a dream. The dreaming mind and the contents of the dream seen as, say, separate by distance, separate by space and time, but in actuality, they are not separate, these are the same. So therefore, what we see, they are nothing but the play of your own mind, the play of the own mind, empty of externality. This is one level of the understanding of the emptiness. And the third one, emptiness of objectivity, like the movie projector and the movie. The movie is projected on the screen, and the projector is behind you. And you watch the movie on the screen, but actually the movie is coming from the projector. So the projector and projected, these two are separated by space. So that we accept the externality. Externality is not rejected, but the what object is purely coming from this subject. Independent of the subject, there's nothing there as the object. Okay, so we see that there are various levels of the observer-dependent reality or the subjective-dependent reality. The next slide, please. Okay, this is a very important, I briefly touched earlier. So now here we see that on the first, the picture we have Nagarjuna, the 1st century, the great Buddhist philosopher, the Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna. And then in the second, you can see, of course, Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr both contributed to what is known as the quantum physics, and Einstein, of course, for the relativity theory. So we see that in Buddhist philosophy, there is the concept of the two truths, conventional truth and the ultimate truth. And in quantum, of course, the conventional truth talking about the conventional reality, more than macro world, and the ultimate truth more the macro world. So we see the presentation of the macro and the micro, the way the Buddha indicated, form is empty, emptiness is form. And whereas in the second case, contemporary physics, the relativity theory talks about the macro world, about the universe, about the galaxies, about the solar system, and so forth, about the macro world. Whereas the quantum physics talks about the macro world, how things behave on the micro level, on the sub-elementary particle level. So this is the thing. Now we see that many scientists, they are thinking of working on the unified field theory, where you can, with the same theory, you can explain quantum mechanics as well as the relativity theory, but so far it's not really successful. And whereas in Buddhism, the conventional truth and the ultimate truth, Buddha said it very clearly that the two should not be seen as dichotomous. These two should be seen as the same object, the same reality, seen in two different ways. So this is how we can see the harmony of the macro and the micro world in the Buddhist philosophy. And whereas in physics, this is actually an ongoing process of whether or not the two can be brought together in one theory. So this is something to be explored in the future. This is a very important point. In this connection, I'd like to share with you that 2 years ago, I was in Israel for a conference on consciousness, and it was organized by a neuroscientist, a renowned neuroscientist, and he had such a childlike, the curiosity is amazing. So I talked about, okay, the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. And I thought about this, the harmony of the two truths, and particularly one stanza which I'm going to share with you a little later. So there, he was extremely fascinated, like a small child, child, he was inquiring about it, and he was memorizing that line like how the small child memorizes it. Okay, so if you look at this picture, to the extreme left, the whitish part, this says what is known as the Big Bang. Big Bang, and towards extreme right side, extreme right, where you see the galaxies, this says what is today, after 15 billion years ago, after the Big Bang. So this is the time, and then the Big Bang and what the space is today. So their Big Bang, what is that? What is that known as the starting point? What is that thing which exploded, the big explosion? What is that? What the physicists call as the singularity. What exactly is that singularity? In that singularity, is there anything? Was there anything there? So this is a big question, and this is what they oftentimes the physicists call as the quantum vacuum. Quantum vacuum, and of course the physicists would say that quantum vacuum doesn't mean that nothing is there. They describe it as full of potentiality. This is the presentation or the view of many of the scientists. So this says this is like the substrate of the whole universe today. And next slide, please. So now bringing the concept of the evolution of the universe from the point of view of the quantum physicists and from the point of view of the Buddhist philosophy, is that if you look at the first one, the 2 bullet points, the substratum emptiness and its derivative universe parallel in time and space. So the emptiness, what is seen in the macro world as the basic framework of the whole universe. So that and the reality that we see of the conventional world that we see, these two coexist not in the form of two different entities coexisting. They are the two things existing as the same nature, so in time and space. Whereas the substratum vacuum and the derivative universe in arrow of time in the physics, in quantum physics, say the Big Bang, that is the substratum vacuum quality, quantum vacuum. And then what is today is the derivative of that. It existed with these separated by distance in the time. So these two don't coexist. The next slide, please. Okay, I don't want to touch on this part. This is about the quantum teleportation, non-locality, extremely important concept in quantum mechanics, quantum entanglement, and the Buddhist concept of dependent origination. If one really understands objectively, nothing is there, it's all the pure subjective, while at the same time rejecting nihilism, then we can see the non-locality and the teleportation concept really tally with the Buddhist concept of interdependency. The next slide, please. Okay, so this concept of the emptiness of subjectivity, we see that they are like these 5 levels of understanding from the number 1 through to number 5, progressively becoming subtler. The first one is very gross, and the second one is subtler, and the 5th one is the subtlest. The next slide. Okay, now the 5th one, which I indicated earlier, emptiness of objective existence. This one can be summarized in this line. Emptiness, what is objective? If Buddhist philosophy emphasizes so much on the objective reality, what is objective reality? If this question asks, I would say the emptiness of objectivity is the objectivity of the object. Okay, this is what I'd like to say. And this is the line which the neuroscientist in Israel, he was just like a small child memorizing it. And first he was asking somebody. And then that person brought him back to me, and I just repeated that. And he was like a small child memorizing it. He was so thrilled by this. Emptiness of objectivity of the object is the objectivity of the object. Of course, this requires a lot of the studies and reflection. In particular, I would say the quantum physicists and the physicists, a bright physicist, if you study this, will surely understand it, not taking too long. The next slide, please. Okay, this is the place, Nalanda Monastic University, where all these brilliant thoughts, like what is today, like quantum physics, the one-time Indian quantum physicist Rajaraman, he happened to be taking part in the teaching given by His Holiness the Dalai Lama on emptiness, and then at the end of the talk, he met His Holiness separately, and then he told His Holiness the Dalai Lama, "This is amazing. Quantum physics is just to the West. It is known for the last 100 years, but the same concept, quantum physics, in a different form, but the same concept was already there in India since 2,500 years ago. So where? Like this place, Nalanda Monastic University. Unfortunately, this is the greatest loss of the human treasure, the treasure of the humanity. It was lost, it was destroyed in 13th century. It was very unfortunate, the loss of a great legacy of the past, the humanity. The next slide, please. Okay, next slide, next. Okay, so this is going to be a beautiful summary. So the relativity is taught, say the Newton, what he said was, what he taught was the relativity of space. And Albert Einstein came and he added the relativity of the space and time. And then the relativity of space, time, and mind, which was more discussed by Charles Darwin. So that relativity of all three is what you find taught in the Buddhist philosophy of the interdependency. Next slide. We're almost done now. Okay, look at this. This is so beautiful. Christian monks studying geometry and astronomy, indicating the openness to the modern studies. The next slide, please. Okay, so now with all these concepts of interdependency, His Holiness the Dalai Lama come up with applying this concept to the world, for the world, what he calls as the universal ethics, beyond all borders of differences, religions, ethnicities, the hemispheres, and so forth, where everybody can embrace the universal ethics through the appreciation of the concept of interdependency, that we're all interdependent. We cannot escape from each other's the interconnectedness. The next slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is very important, but I have no time. I'd like to the next slide, please. I'd like to show you one slide, then I'll stop here. Still the next slide, please. Okay, this is what I like to read for all of us. So what Albert Einstein said, so what the Buddha taught of the interdependency for the humanity, and what His Holiness the Dalai Lama taught as the universal ethics for the humanity. What did Albert Einstein said, the physicist, a world-renowned physicist, what did he say? This is so important message for all of us, and how he connected that whatever we learn should be for the humanity, for the harmony of the humanity. So what he said is, the human being is a part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He or she experiences himself, his thoughts and feeling as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion. This is his word, optical delusion. We see as separated, that I, mine, and you and yours, separated. This separation is an optical delusion, ignorance. And what the Buddha indicated as the root cause of all the problems is ignorance of his consciousness. The next slide, please. Then he said, this delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a persons nearest to us. What should we do? How to get out of this prison? He said, our task must be to free ourselves from this prison of widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures. And how to embrace all living creatures? By understanding the interdependency of all of us and the whole of the nature in its beauty. Okay, thank you so much.
So now we have our guest, Professor Vitiello, who is, I'm very honored to present him, is an honorary professor of theoretical physics at the University of Salerno, and is also associate at the Italian Institute of Nuclear Physics. He got his PhD in physics at the University of Wisconsin, and his research activity in elementary particles and condensed matter physics, biological systems, and brain studies. He is the author of more than 250 papers and several books, among those My Double Unveiled, the dissipative quantum model of brain, and quantum mechanics together with Professor Umezawa, and quantum field theory and its microscopic manifestations. He also collaborates with Luc Montagnier, the Nobel Prize for Medicine, and his research on electromagnetic properties of DNA. And since 2003, he has collaborated with Walter Freeman in neurosciences. So please, Professor Vitiello, and we're very, very glad to have you with us. And I would like to ask you, all the people who is listening in this moment, that I would like to remind you that you can send your questions that we will discuss with our guest during the questions and answers time directly after Professor Vitiello talk. You can send your questions by the chat that you see in your screen. So thank you very much. The ground is with you. Thank you.
I'm very glad to be here. I would like, first of all, to thank Professor Giacomella Orofino, who has organized this meeting. I am Giuseppe Vitiello from the University of Salerno. I'm a physicist, and this should need some justification why a physicist is here talking about mind and brain and things like that, but I will not go in that detail since time is short. Only I will try to stress at the beginning one fact. As you see from the title, this is a quantum field theory approach. So it's not just quantum mechanics. This is because quantum field theory offers the possibility to have to describe different dynamical regimes in which the brain can sit during its functional activity. So this quantum is important, but especially also this field theory approach. What I will tell you is the result of research since many years in collaboration with Walter Freeman, a neuroscientist, which now unfortunately is no more with us. He passed away in 1916, and with Hiromi Umezawa, another physicist, a Japanese one, and many other people, colleagues, and so on. So let me go immediately into matter, which, okay, I start from an observation made by Lashley. Lashley, already in the 40s, he was commenting his observations in the neuroscience laboratory. So this is something which he was observing. I mean, it's not just a matter of a conjecture. I will read such a short sentence by himself. He called it a dilemma. So he says, nerve impulses are transmitted from cell to cell through definite intercellular connections. Yet all behavior seems to be determined by masses of excitation within general fields of activity without regard to particular nerve cells. then he was asking what sort of nervous organization might be capable of responding to a pattern of excitation without limited specialized path of conduction. So this is the situation in 40, and it might sound quite strange, but it is still a dilemma today, because we know a lot more and more. We learn about cells, nervous cells, about connections, anatomical connection, dendrites, axons, synapses, and so on. But still, the way they connect in the functional activity, still at this point is missing. After these observations, Karl Pribram, another god in the neuroscience sky, he was proposing the picture of holograms to be applied to the brain, just to justify how such wave patterns were formed. But after all, he was not the only one to try to solve, of course, such kind of a problem. Let me tell you, just maybe skipping these slides for the moment, going to, okay, this is Walter Freeman. He was a very nice person, but I wanted to show this picture first, which is very popular now in many journals and books of neuroscience on brain studies. As you see, we have regions which are called assembly of billions of neurons. They synchronously are excited, are oscillating in synchrony. And this happens all around the brain, as you see in different regions, almost simultaneously. And according to the different activity, you have excitations in different regions. But even though the whole brain is always, all of it, interested. Now, such regions, going back to the slides I skipped before, they were called by Freeman packets of waves, and they form in a few milliseconds. This is the time scale of the brain activity, milliseconds, and they form in a few milliseconds. They have a duration between 80 and 120 milliseconds, and frequencies between 12 and 80 hertz, or a little bit even more, 12 and let's say 100 hertz. So this is the problem to which, as a physicist, I've been addressed and still I'm working on. How is possible that these regions, they form and they coherently, they came from coherent excitation and oscillations of neurons. Neurons in such assembly, they play like in an orchestra. So what you can detect is the orchestra, let me call it music, namely the signal which comes from the whole region where these neurons are oscillating, which is, after all, what the caption of this picture is saying. You see, the image reveals the highly organized nature of intrinsic brain activity, represented by correlated spontaneous fluctuation in the functional magnetic resonance imaging signal. So this problem was also triggering the interest of by Luigi Maria Ricciardi and Hiromu Mezawa already in 1967 in Naples. I should say, where else would it be possible such thing if not in Naples? They were proposing, they did propose to apply the mathematical tool of quantum field theory used normally for condensed matter physics, for particle physics, to apply such a tool to the brain study. The reason was that by using such tool, namely quantum field theory, you could describe the dynamical formation of these long-range correlations. You can read here in this red sentence, of the long-range correlations among the neurons I was talking about before. Now, in this model they proposed, so this is a quantum model of a brain. Please notice, this is not a model of the quantum brain, but is the quantum model of a brain. The brain is considered to be a classical system, and through this model, I would say a macroscopic quantum system. But what is really quantum is the model, the description, the mathematics we use is the mathematics of quantum field theory. Now, their model, the model by Ricciardi di Mezzawa, was not considering the fact that the brain is an open system. The brain is always in contact and exchanging energy, matter, information with the environment, with the world around us. So this model has been modified by myself and Freeman and other people into the dissipative quantum model, where the word dissipative means that there is indeed dissipation. Dissipation, of course, not just one way, but from the brain to the environment and from the environment to the brain. So in such a exchange, which I will call a dialogue between the brain and the world in which it is embedded. So Umezawa, he was a Japanese, he has been in Naples for 3 years, around that time, in the middle of the 60s. And he was observing in such a paper together with Luigi Maria Ricciardi, which already I told you, namely the existence of almost simultaneous responses in several regions of the brain, a kind of a long-range correlation, does not find any explanation in terms of activity of the single nerve cells. You see, this is Lashley teaching what Lashley already said. And we are in the presence of a new non-classical mechanism. We have to look for new non-classical. So the suggestion is that there could be a quantum model to describe such matter, namely the brain. Now, in quantum field theory, one mechanism, which is a central mechanism of modern quantum field theory, is the mechanism of a spontaneous breakdown of a symmetry. This means that you might have a system, in general, any system. The system is described by certain equations. These equations do not change if you do some symmetry transformations on the object appearing in the equation. So you say that there is a symmetry. Now, if you break the symmetry, if you introduce from the external some disturbing in the sense that breaks the symmetry, a disturbing action, a disturbing input, then the breakdown of the symmetry produce a coherent state. It happens that the elementary components of the system, they get in phase synchronous activity, which we say in physics, you get a coherent state, so you get coherence. Of course, this is possible, as I already told you, because the system is an open system, and an open system, due to its interaction with the world in which it is embedded, it is in non-equilibrium states. So you have phase transitions, namely transitions among the different dynamical regime through which the system goes. And such dynamics is characterized by self-similarity, namely by fractal-like structures. So you have scale laws. I do not know if I will have time to go on this point. Summing up, you have spontaneous breakdown of symmetry, formation of a long-range correlation, and out of such long-range correlations, you get ordered patterns, namely those assembly of neurons I did show you in the picture before. So you see, please notice that order in physics means lack of symmetry, which is something different from what normally in everyday life we are used to say. Order is a lack of symmetry. Symmetry is a disorder. Order is a lack of symmetry, is possibility to make a distinction, is possibility to find things among many things. Symmetry means that everything looks alike. So order is a positive, from an information point of view, a positive concept, namely there is a content, an information content in the order. Such information content is missing in the symmetry when you have a symmetry structure. If you just make a rough sketch and each of these points represent, for example, a different dynamical regime for your system, the reason why I told you you do need quantum field theory, otherwise you would not it would not be possible to consider so many dynamical regimes for the same system, then you might even think to go through these dynamical regimes along a trajectory. This trajectory is a classical, you can show, is a classical trajectory and is a chaotic also trajectory, in the sense that if you have a slight change in the original, in the boundary conditions, in the initial conditions, then you get trajectory completely diverging. This looks like a defect in some sense, but is not. Is highly. This is at the basis of the extremely efficient answer that the brain gives to a changeable situation in the world in which it is embedded. So already by themselves, it is the possibility to derive such kind of a fissure from a theoretical approach, which describes such a kind of plasticity of the brain, such kind of capability to adapt to different situations and to respond in different appropriate ways, which is crucial for our survival, of course, then already this would be, how to say, enough, quite satisfactorily for a model, for a theoretical model. So I repeat again, dissipation. First of all, brain is an open system. Then you have a time evolution. This time evolution is a time evolution including variation of entropy, namely construction and of ordered structures. So this means that the evolution is irreversible. You have a time evolution, which is irreversible time evolution. This means that an arrow of time, a privileged direction in time evolution, arises. So, which is what we do observe in our everyday life. So all of this is embedded in the mathematics by which you describe the brain. Now, the mathematics we do have is made only to describe the closed system. If you have an open system, first you have to close it by doubling the degrees of freedom. Suppose you describe your system with some degrees of freedom, let's say AK, just to sketch these degrees of freedom. Let's call A sub K. Then you have to go from A sub K, which is the open system, to include also, I call it A tilde sub K, namely degrees of freedom which are quite the same like A, but different, but distinct. This A tilde, they denote the environment, the world around us, the world as we see it. Now, of course, our interaction with the world is very complex, is terribly complex, but from the point of view of the flux balance between the system and the environment, the flux balance makes this A tilde just like the A system, because whatever exit from A goes in A tilde, and from whatever exit from A tilde goes to AK, because the system now is closed. So since you have to exchange in with out in a flux balance, namely the energy outgoing from the system must be equal to the energy that the environment is getting, then this difference has to be 0. Then A tilde looks like the image in a mirror of A. So the A tilde is the world as we see it. We interact with such a world. When I say we, I mean the brain. But this world appears to be the image in time. It is the time reversed image of A. So it is like we have a mirror which is a time mirror. I have called this A tilde the double by using a quite used metaphor in the literature, in literary metaphor. So we have the system and its double. Its double is just a copy in the time reversed description of the A system. And what happens when we interact with world is that we have a continual updating of meanings. What are, from where came this meaning? The meaning of the information we get from the environment and the meaning on what we say to the environment, what we mean with our action to the environment, this meaning finds its origin, its source in such a continual dialogue, continual updating between the system and its double. So what really happens is that memory, and this is contrary to what normally people think about, also due to the wrong modeling of a brain on computers, which is completely wrong. Brain has nothing to do with computers and vice versa. So memory is not recording of information. Memory is recording of the formation of meanings. So we have a memory of meanings. What we recall in our mind is a meaningful information, not just an information which otherwise we do not know what to do with that, but it has to be a meaningful information. So how it works, all of it? Well, suppose you have to do some action, getting out of the room where you are, for example, then you have to do some actions. You have, first of all, you perceive where is the door out of which you want to get out. Then you make an hypothesis. You go back in time to what you did in a similar situation. And what you did in a similar situation, you make the hypothesis that can be good, it can work also now in the present situation. So you see, you are going back in time to go in the future. So this going back in time is the action of the double, because the double, remember, has time reversed. If we go forward in time, as we do, the double, our image, our time image goes backward in time. So the double goes back in time in our previous past perceptual experience, trying to find what can be useful for our action. So the brain works in such an action perception cycle. This action perception cycle is, by the way, one of the central themes of the Middle European, not only Middle European philosophy, of course, but I'm thinking of people like Merleau-Ponty, the same Heidegger, or even Sartre. So the action perception cycle is describes such going backward in time and to do an action forward in time. And in doing this, there is one important point, is that our dialogue with the double, with the world in which we are embedded, is permanent, but is also instantaneous. We feel immediately, in a very short time, which one is the situation. Here, I'm saying something which is very much near to Spinoza's idea of intuitive science. We know without computing. And this is one of the points, as was stressed also by von Neumann, why brain and machine and computer machine, they have absolutely nothing to do together, to have together. There is nothing common, because brain is mostly a non-computational machine, as Roger Penrose, for example, also would say. Now, all of this comes through our body, and so emotions is a big part in this game. Emotion is a crucial part in this game, and the picture which is emerging from what I'm telling you is that we do not have only a logical apparatus, but we have a non-computational apparatus. We have intuition, and I will tell you something more about this, but let me go. Oh, okay, it's already here. And this means that there is room for imagination. There are degrees of freedom in the brain-mind activity, because mind is the double activity, and the brain is a forward activity, double is going backward in the search of our previous experience. So there is room for the imagination. Imagination is, with the degrees of freedom it carries, is crucial for creation, for the novelty of our action. Because if we rest on mirror neurons, which are, of course, a great discovery of recent years, but mirror neurons, they are only imitation. They can only generate imitation of what we see. But imitation is not enough. We need a mimesis in the sense of Aristotle. Namely, we need to add, with the freedom of imagination, something more to such that a variation can be produced on the observed action. So there is an undeterminacy due to imagination. And this is the richness, if you want, of the brain-mind activity. Please notice that this only comes because we have a broken symmetry. And order has been created. Order, as I told you, introduced diversity. Of course, aesthetic experience is not limited to artistic experience, but it has to do with our being well in the world, with our harmonious being in the world. So this slide as something which already I told you, and I just repeat it. The double is the mind, describes the mind activity, not matter. But in the model, there is something which arises from the mathematics. The double and the brain, so the mind and the matter of the brain, they are fully, completely entangled. So this means that we, I mean our brain, is fully entangled with the world in which we are embedded. But this means that there is an interdependence, as was in the title of this talk, between a brain and mind, not only, I would say, but between ourselves and the world around us. If we cut out the world around us as unfortunately happens in some too much frequently, I would say, in today's we are living, this is a suicide, because the brain can only live together with the other ones, which are its own double. So if we kill the other ones, if we close the arbors, we are closing our mind, we are closing our brain, we are killing our double. This is, of course, but the stupidity, of course, is also without bounds. In any case, it is very interesting to see what happens when these links with the external world are weakened. For example, in dreaming or in meditation, or when under the action of psychoactive substance, or in any case when there is a low degree of openness of the brain. When these things happen, then you have small neuronal assemblies. So those blobs I did show you before, those orchestra assemblies of neurons, they became smaller. In such a case, the model predicts that it is much more easy to go from one dynamic regime to another dynamic regime. Namely, the dynamics is a criticality. There is a criticality in the dynamics, is a critical dynamics, as we say. In such cases, you get that you might feel, as in dreaming, a flow of memories in a movie-like sequence of images. And we travel through such memory states. So one effect of lowering the degrees of openness of the brain in conditions of dreaming, meditation, psychoactive substance, is at the source of our dreaming activity, and especially of that movie-like sequence we do live when we sleep and dream. We also conjecture that such activity may occur in anesthesia, when we are under anesthesia, or in deep meditation stage, or also altered states of consciousness, also induced by slow breathing techniques, possibly, probably, we have to, some work is going on this part, in some coma states, and this would be very much interesting. Namely, now, how such a state can be induced? Well, we know that they can be induced by a persistent influence of rhythmically modulated visual stimuli, or also by musical rhythms. And in some cases, such kind of inputs, they can isolate completely the brain, like in hypnosis. Now, what happens in our activity of dreaming, what I'm just describing, is that we have a sort of relics of information codes. Our memories, the meaningfulness of our memories, they get mixed in an intricate way, and always with some obscure core, which was the reason by which Freud was looking so much at the dreams. He was talking of a dream novel about such obscure core, which appears, which may come out from our dreams. So we have fragile little bits of consciousness, as Greenfield would say, Susan Greenfield. Now, when we are not so much connected with the external world, think of sleeping the easiest way, we lack synchronization to an external reference clock. So we lost the original time ordering of the memories. And the mixture we can get out of that is that those memory traces, they compose in new scenarios, which seems completely different from what we feel when we are awake. Now, there is one important point, is that any action of the brain is intentionally oriented. The brain always has something, an objective to reach. So this intentionality goes along with the meaningfulness, because if we want to do something, have the intention to do something, and we are successful or not in doing that, then that will mean something for us. And this creates our identity in quite unique way. And it remains in our dialogue with the double as a deep red thread, which connects all our meaningful experiences. In such kind, specific kind of experience, as I already said, we have a quasi full matching between the self and its double. And this experience lasts up to the point of something, when something break up such experience, namely big interference, then we wake up. And once we wake up, we restore the awareness of the distinction between ourself and our double. And we might also say in that case, it was only a dream. Which usually we say when we wake up out of a dream. So thank you very much. And really, I would like to thank Giacomella for the opportunity to tell you about these things. Goodbye.
So now we begin with a question and answers session. And first of all, I would like to thank our guests because they have really been very, very interesting. We have many questions. It's very difficult to choose which question because we don't have so much time at the moment. We have only maybe 10-15 minutes. And I'm now receiving word that there have been many connection up to 720 persons. So it is really interesting. It is really very important. So I have a question for, let's say that I can concentrate 2 questions for Venerable Geshe Dorji Damdul, and I will read both because I think they can be connected. So the question says, in the Madhyamika systems, all phenomena, both impermanent and permanent, are dependently arising. So it's Pratitya Samutpada. Through their being dependently arising, their emptiness is established. The questions of Saragamati Sutra says, those which arise dependently are free from inherent existence. Could you please explain this concept? How these 2 different views can coexist? And connected with this question, there is another question, which is understanding interdependence through intellect and applying this knowledge in a concrete way in everyday life. Is it possible? How could we obtain this result? Could you please explain more? Thank you, Geshe.
Thank you. This is a very important question. And as Professor Orifino said, these 2 are connected. The first one is these 2 concepts, dependent origination and emptiness. These 2 appear as very different. And how can these 2, one which is full of functionalities, dependent origination, and on the other hand, emptiness, the negation. So how these 2 can be seen as the complementary, or these 2 be seen as the coexisting. This is a very important point. As I indicated earlier, the emptiness, when we speak about emptiness, which is to be understood in the form of negation, it is not to be seen as nihilism. It is to be seen as dependent origination. In other words, the same object, how you look at it, depends on how you look at it, then the object appears that way. For example, say this flower, the flower here, if you look at with your naked eyes, to appreciate the flower, you see a flower. If you look at this through electron microscope, you will see just a bunch of atoms, that's it. And you will not see the flower. So it's the same object. If I ask somebody who's looking at through electron microscope, where is that thing? Absence of flower, there you will see, where is that? You will say it's here. And if I ask the other person who sees the flower, where you see the flower? It's here. The same object seen in 2 different forms. So this is what happens. So when you see both are correct, if I look at the water, for example, say if I look at this water, say ordinary people see this as water, and a chemist will see this as H2O, and a physicist will see this as electrons, protons, neutrons. Who is correct? All 3 are correct. It's how you look at it. So with this, say when you look at it from one way, you see it's water and it functions as water. That is the meaning of the dependent origination. How the water comes to the origination by dependence on the macro the phenomena operating on the micro level. Those micro phenomena operating on the micro level, which is seen by the physicists, the particle physicists, like electrons, protons, neutrons, and so forth. But dependence on these, then the emergent property as water comes into being. So dependent origination, there's a play of the dependent origination, which allows the manifestation of the macro world, water. So which is known as the dependent origination. And then deep inside, what we see as objective real, so independent there, that is rejected. That is how we see that, just as the way I said earlier, if you look at the same object through electron microscope, you will not see water. You see just a bunch of atoms, that's it. So in the experience of the atoms, you don't experience water. So the point is that what do we say is the emptiness of the water? What do we say is water on the other hand? So these two, there's no contradiction. We are looking at the same object from two different perspectives, two different analyses. So this is where we see the harmony of dependent origination and emptiness, not to be seen as the opposite or the two contradictory phenomena. Then the next point is, once you know dependent origination and emptiness, intellectually, how can we apply this in our day-to-day life, everyday life? This is an extremely important point. And as the Professor Vitiello, in his presentation, he talked about how the brain operates by the support of the environment and brain. Without the environment, the brain is dead. So there we see that the operation of the brain or operation of the psychology, how the psychology works. So that must be known through the understanding of dependent origination. And we have to know how the ontological reality, emptiness, is a reality. And if you know that, then we see the dependent origination so crystal clear. Once you know that, how the mind works, finally, everybody wants happiness. Nobody wants suffering. And the suffering is because of the ignorance. What ignorance? Ignorance failing to see the dependent nature of phenomena. For example, like what Professor Vitiello said, that the brain and the workings of the brain and the environment, we cannot really isolate the two. If these two are isolated, the brain is dead. So these two are interdependent. Likewise, we see that everything comes into being by dependence on other factors. When you know that, then my happiness is because of your happiness. So if you're happy, I'm happy. The COVID-19, if one country neglects its population, its citizens of the COVID vaccines, then they're not at all taken care of, no matter how much protection the other countries they give to their citizens. Either they have to block this particular country altogether, the rest of the world altogether. Don't let your citizens go out and don't let anybody come in. That is one thing. But if that happens, this is suicidal. You cannot survive. You have to depend on other countries. Once you depend on other countries, that is the flow of the people happening. With the flow of the people, that country who does not have any vaccine, where people the COVID simply rising in number, people go from that country to the next country. Next country will come to your country. So no point in you trying to safeguard your country, provided the other countries are neglected. So that you have the responsibility. If you want to make sure that your country is protected, help other countries to be protected. So this is understanding of the interdependence is so well demonstrated by the COVID. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So I have a question for Professor Vitiello. So, as we have seen, one of the key doctrines of Buddhist philosophy is the concept of dependent origination of phenomena, which says that all phenomena are dependently arising. How this concept relate with quantistic physics models of the description of reality?
Yes, well, thank you for the question, which relates immediately to what Director Damdul just said, namely what we do observe as a fact is that we are not the union, a collection of pieces of individuals or of atoms. We are like, indeed, the brain is a very nice example, but also a crystal, society, everything. We are just like in an orchestra. Each one of us plays its own instrument, but this has to be in phase with the other ones. So we, in physics, we do observe that the basic law of matter, I mean matter, by matter I mean from solid state physics to elementary particle physics, including cosmology and all of that brings you to a dynamical law of coherence, namely objects, individuals, think of atoms, for example, they are related in phase excitation modes. So they play together. Now, this being in phase is something which today might be also called entanglement, but this is already too much, I would say, because it's quite a basic principle in any physical understanding of how matter is made. Otherwise, you would never obtain, let's say, one of the simplest things, which is not at all simple, by the way, a crystal. Who tells to the atoms, there are billions of atoms in a crystal, of course, who tells to an atom to sit in its lattice site? And although oscillating a little bit, because you cannot have a zero temperature, but it does not move from there. Otherwise, the crystal will not survive as a crystal. So what we do have is a coherent dynamics, which is at the basis of all the natural phenomena we do observe. Now, in this view, social phenomena, they are not metaphysics. I mean, they belong to the physical organization of matter and of the world. So also for those phenomena, there are such kind of correlation laws. I use the word correlation, which is not interaction. Correlation is in phase oscillation. Like just in an orchestra, the players, they play in phase. They do not force each other with some kind of interaction. In the interaction, you have exchange of forces. In the correlations, there is no such forced behavior. It's a natural behavior where natural means the lowest energy, so the most favorable. This is why any operation going the opposite way of this correlation is a violence. And this applies also to humans, to nature, to animals, I mean, I was talking of aesthetical experience. The aesthetical experience, according to one of our colleagues, Fabrizio Desideri in Florence, is just the feeling of such an harmony. And this includes, of course, also art experience, but is not limited to art experience. One dimension of the brain is the aesthetical dimension, namely this feeling in the harmony of the whole world around us. So this is, and you can show it mathematics. Going from microscopic, as Director Damdul was saying, from microscopic level to macroscopic, you can follow this process as a dynamical process, and this is you get a sort of metamorphosis. You have a collection of atoms which might be in a gas state, so even weakly or not at all interacting. But if you have a proper boundary condition, you have a metamorphosis. This gas of atoms, they condense and they might form a crystal, or they might form a liquid, depending on boundary conditions. So you can follow, you can trace with mathematics and with observations such a kind of process, bringing you from a microscopic to macroscopic. if I have just one more second, I would like to add one more observation to this point. Usually when we talk of microscopic to going to macroscopic or this playing in phase, we think always in some way from an anthropocentric point of view. Like we are there and we as humans, we see as observers, we see. But this is not fully correct, because what happens is that one electron, let's say, just to make an example, moving in a crystal or in a piece of matter, the electron is observed by the neighboring atoms. You do not need a human to observe. I mean, the electron is observed by the other electrons. So this process of appearing in different forms, or emptiness, to use the word which Director Damdul was using, this is intrinsic. It's not just because a point of view, is not just a point of view of some human observer. It's an intrinsic natural property. And this is beautiful. I mean, it's really an aesthetically pleasure when you can realize studying physics, you can formulate in true mathematics these things. And it works, by the way, because you can construct things which are useful for our everyday life.
So it is so interesting and so, I mean, maybe useful for our life. Very interesting. It's this change of perspective that we can have after all these considerations. But very unfortunately, we have to stop here because time is really over. And I thank you, everybody, for the participation. I thank you, Geshe, Venerable Geshe Dorji Damdul, for your, thank you so much. We are far, but I really hope we meet one day. And Professor Vitiello, thank you so much. And I would like to thank also the Technomedit, who have been helping us with all this great work of connection of so many people, more than 700 people altogether, and especially our Rita Cristallo has been, you know, fantastic. And our translator, Gabriella Caramore, is really very, I think she did a very great job. So thank you to everybody, and see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Please get the Zoom link that you have been receiving. So thank you very much, and good evening to everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye bye.